how water moves through the world. Water is going to continue to move no matter what. You can either help create the way the water moves, you can step into it, you can create dams, you can create guardrails, and either you're part of that change or the change just washes over you and happens. And as a catalyst leader, I think you have to be part of that creation process, and you have to say, I want to do more than just have it happen to me. I want to create how this shows up in the world.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering catalysts to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And we are thrilled today to have time with Christy Soukhamneut. Christy has more than 30 years of experience in mortgage and banking with deep knowledge of data analytics, strategic planning, sales enablement, and digital innovation. She currently serves as the Chief Lending Officer at University Federal Credit Union. Prior to her time at UFCU, she led top-performing sales teams for a mid-sized IMB. Christy has led billion-dollar acquisitions and is a cycle-tested financial executive that brings an operating perspective to the table. She currently sits on the boards of Trained and Halcyon while also serving on ResBog, I had to ask how to pronounce that, for MBA, and on the Credit Union Advisory Board for Fannie Mac. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here to have this conversation with you ladies.
Thank you. So we shared a little bit about some of the amazing things that you have done and are doing with your career, but we'd love to just sort of take a step back and hear about your catalytic journey. Maybe you can share a few highlights that you're most proud of that helps us see your catalytic nature.
You know, it's interesting that you asked that question. And I think about, we talked in the little pre-session about being a yoga teacher. And it's kind of a little bit of a different thing than you would think. I mean, everybody has hobbies, but not everybody talks about them. And one of the things they talk about in yoga is that how you show up on your mat is how you show up everywhere. And I think that this is very true just in life, how we start life, how we fall into things. And sometimes that's very planned. If you're like my son, who's an engineer, he has had his life planned out since he was in 6th grade, but that's who and how he shows up in the world. And I think about that from being a catalyst for how I got in the industry that I'm in. I started when I was 15, and it was because somebody showed up at my school who was a friend who had a part-time job, and he was moving, and he said, hey, my boss would love me to find somebody else. I think you'd be a good fit. Want a part-time job? And so I took a part-time job working for an appraisal firm and did that throughout high school and college. And then when I graduated from college, my dad had a horrendous experience with his mortgage and with the process of building my mom her dream house. And he said, you know what? I think we should open a mortgage company. So at 20 years old, I had just graduated from college. I had just gotten married and went into business with my dad owning a mortgage company. So I'm literally less than 6 months past my 20th birthday. I have owned a house for about 5 weeks and have been married for less than 2 months when I opened my first mortgage company. And I think that's who I am and how I show up in the world. That what's the challenge? What's the obstacle? And how are we going to do it? It doesn't matter if I have the right experience. It doesn't matter if it's whatever. We have such an opportunity to learn. And when we show up authentically and we just bring curiosity to the table, it's amazing what can happen. Like, I never would have planned this career. I never would have picked the chair that I'm sitting in today. Like, it wasn't this lifelong dream like my son from 6th grade. It's seeing what happens and looking at where I can create impact and value.
It's such a great illustration and way to give insight into the leaning into the uncertainty and ambiguity, not without fear necessarily, but just sort of like moving in fast. I'm wondering how you relate to the concept of catalyst. You kind of illustrated it, but maybe also how would you explain to others what a catalyst executive is?
The way I would think about it is think about how water moves through the world. And water is going to continue to move no matter what. You can either help create the way the water moves, you can step into it, you can create dams, you can create guardrails, and either you're part of that change or the change just washes over you and happens. And as a catalyst leader, I think you have to be part of that creation process, and you have to say, I want to do more than just have it happen to me. I want to create how this shows up in the world.
It's an interesting metaphor. Tracy usually has this one that I really love, because as catalysts, we can sort of sometimes also get caught in the river. If you think of the flow of the business and like, we can get wrapped up in it. And as a catalyst, sort of what you're saying is having the perspective to like stand on the banks and make some decisions instead of just sort of like being swept away by the current.
Absolutely.
I'd love to tap directly into your wisdom as a catalyst leader and name a tension that so many catalytic executives face. And so it's such a joy to talk to you in the industry you sit, given the times we're in, right? The financial industry, the home ownership world, industry is facing a lot of disruption. As we're talking to you right now, we're in the middle of the fires happening across Southern California. We've seen the devastating impact of hurricanes on the East Coast. We are seeing skyrocketing insurance premiums, cancellations within whole states. Like there is a strain for homeowners, for lenders, for the mortgage industry. And so as a catalytic executive, you get to represent for us. You help organizations with goals that they've set. They have a strategy in motion. And you're sitting in an industry that has so much disruption happening that can't be ignored. And so can you talk to us about how you negotiate those two realities simultaneously for an organization?
You know, Tracy, I'm so glad that you asked this question because people don't think about how change happens to us. You know, you hear gurus and leaders, and I'm sure you bring this to your clients too, that you say, well, you've got to create disruption in your organization or disruption is going to happen. Well, sometimes the disruption is happening not because somebody else is being more innovative, but because the world around you just changes. And in the case of financial services in particular, we can talk about mortgage, but just in the case of overall financial services, this is not something that people need on a daily basis. Like they don't buy a car every day, they don't buy a house every day. And so the process really didn't shift or change a lot in my entire career until COVID. And in COVID, so many things accelerated for the way that we operate in the world, not just in financial services, but across all things. And consumers became disenchanted with just saying, well, getting a mortgage is like going to the dentist. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to have to, and it's just going to be painful. They started pushing back and expecting more and better. And that is what really started forcing the industry to think about how we show up and the change that we have to have happen because consumers were like, I don't want it to be as painful as going to a dentist. Why can't this be easier? In every facet of how they interacted with us. And that started the push. And then you go into, well, what happened because of the economics with COVID, with people losing their jobs, with interest rates going to historic lows that we will, in case anybody wants to get their crystal ball out, we are not going back to that in my lifetime, unless we have another pandemic type episode, or at least in my working lifetime. We're not going back to that. So there's a level set of what the rates look like, but that created an incredible amount of volatility in the industry itself with how much business is done and the lock-in effect, which has an impact on housing affordability. Throw on top of that the insurance concerns that you mentioned, and there are going to be additional insurance concerns that come after the wildfires in California because many homes aren't covered by insurance at all. Many are only covered by the FAIR Plan, which acts and operates very differently than traditional insurance. And regardless of if you have insurance today, those premiums are going to go up. But let's talk about the impact that happens post the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Post crisis, you've got to figure out where you're going to live, how you're going to rebuild. How do you pay those additional living expenses? And so there's a long tail to these cycles. I mean, you still have people that were impacted by Hurricane Helene that still have no place to live.
That's right.
And like I have a friend who literally just moved back in her house yesterday from Helene. And I still have friends who aren't in their homes that are in California. So there's a long chain. And I think this is an opportunity for the industry to say, well, we've been focused a lot on the upfront piece. How do we make this long tail process easier? And how can that impact the program from beginning to end? Because the life cycle for a mortgage product is really not just the time that they start thinking about buying a new home and close on that, or they come in and refinance. It goes all the way through the next 30 years that
Hmm.
they make payments to us, or until they pay that loan off and go somewhere else. So there's a long cycle. And we have the opportunity to say, how do we interact better with partners? A mortgage is one of the most complex financial products that exists. There's so many pieces that go into the back end and so much communication. You could be paying your mortgage to, I'm going to call them ABC Mortgage Company, but that company may just be your servicer. They may
Right.
not be the ones who actually own your loan. And so you're talking to them, but they have zero decision-making authority or very limited decision-making authority because they have to go back to the owner of the loan itself. And most people don't think about that as a part of the process. And why should they? It's always just worked
Yeah.
until it doesn't. And we're at a point today where we're saying it doesn't. The regulatory environment is changing.
Hmm.
And I know that I haven't answered the question yet of how do you manage these two things, but I think that there's a merger that happens between them. Because as I'm thinking about how do I help somebody who's lost everything in a fire, who's having to figure out a temporary living situation, whose job may be disrupted because they can't go to work every day and now they have a period of their earnings being lower and that impacts their qualifications. So how do we care for this entire life cycle, and how do we use what we learn from helping folks that are impacted into making the entire process better? And I think when we challenge ourselves in that way to say we're not just solving this one thing in in a contained environment, how do we take that learning and look at any other place that we can fill in gaps and improve the process overall? And we have to start thinking that way.
Hmm.
If we don't, we're only going to solve minute things, which will end up being band-aids.
As someone in your position, right, it is a C-level officer, I love this idea that you're helping really think through from my world, right, the end user journey in the experience of the offerings that you're putting in the world in such a way of compassion. And there's lending that's already in process, right? And so as you think about the folks that you're managing, how are you helping to keep the train moving on the tracks that exist right now while you're exploring if we should even have a train, right? Like you're looking at new models of how do we serve, and maybe it's new tracks, maybe it's you're serving with an airplane. Like, how do you balance not overly disrupting what is as you deal with the disruption, as you said, that's happening to you?
You know, Change management is a key piece of anything that we do when we think about driving innovation.
Mhm.
And a big piece of change management to me is getting stakeholders involved early and often and having them be part of that brainstorming process. The best ideas don't come from, the glass house and the corporate tower. They come from people that are in the field. And if you're not engaging those folks, you're going to make harmful decisions. You may come up with some disruption and some change, but it won't be positive, or at least it won't be as positive as it could be. When you take the time to sit in the seat of the person who's doing the day-to-day job and ask the curiosity questions. Don't just expect them to be curious about what the organization needs, or even just curious about what, in our case, the member needs and others call clients or borrowers. Ask what that person doing the job needs. One of the most impactful things that I get to do, and one of the most exciting things that I get to do, is I go job share with people on the team. Now, they don't actually let me do the keys or anything, but I get to sit next to them for a half a day or a couple of hours and understand what they do on a day-to-day basis. And that gives us an opportunity to engage with how I'm thinking strategically, how they're thinking about improving just this one thing that's a real pain, or even empowering them to bring that up. So it's important as we do this to get all the right stakeholders in the room, and that includes those frontline team members.
What I love is in many of the years in innovation for me and technology, as it was like we'd kind of pull away and think the big thoughts, and then you kind of tap people in. So what I hear you saying is disruption's happening. It's not like they don't know what's happening in the industry. And so having those conversations happen at the same time while they're doing the job that they're doing every day, as opposed to seeing these as separate streams of work. Like, hey everyone, this is happening and we need to tap everyone's wisdom to have conversations to understand how we should deal with it. Like, it may not change what you're doing today, but it's going to change it soon. And so then it just becomes, back to the water analogy, a flow that
Mhm.
is seamless, as opposed to a like, oh, and now we're different, surprise. That's so lovely. And I love that it's not just finding the right people, but including all the people.
Yeah, but and to Shannon's point, some people are going to raise their hands and they are going to want to be more engaged, and that's okay. Like, we don't need 300 people. In fact, I don't know how we would operate if all 300 people wanted to raise their hand and voice their opinion. We'd figure it out, because how exciting would that be if we had 300 catalysts? But people are going to be more or less engaged. And Shannon, you said figuring out how to find those diamonds in the rough that really can continue to move stuff forward. Like, I want to get better at that. Like, that's what I want to learn from you ladies. How do you get better at finding those people inside your organization that are working on the front lines, that have the capacity to continue to grow and do that? How do you find those people?
We could talk all day about that. We love that conversation because that's our jam. I mean, like we have IP that helps organizations sift even between, because people broadly can be change agents. Some people will have a more positive relationship with change, but what we love finding are the people who can't stop themselves from moving into change. And it doesn't mean that they're always good at it. And to your point, we want to be clear, we are never advocating for having 300 catalysts in a 1,000-person organization or whatever that size is, right? But most organizations do have them. And if they don't know who they are, they're missing two opportunities. One, they're likely we get called being a troublemaker, we don't always get the positive. That's the nice spin on it. Sometimes we're just the disruptor or the troublemaker, right? And so if organizations don't find these people, they can be actually causing more negative things with good intention. But then the other thing is, like, there are these people who are excited about it. And so if you can bring them into the fold and identify them and then help them activate, like, is the thing that they're doing, help them activate, like you were saying, bringing everyone along. It supercharges the organization. But I'm going to end on, it's a pivot to a question that I have for you, because one of the challenges that catalysts have is the fact that often we are at the beginning of things. And so when the impact is realized, we're usually already on to the next thing. And so it can be hard to articulate our value, like, I'm the dot connector, I'm the starter, I'm the activator, that thing that you said you were never going to get done or couldn't even say that word. I helped the organization embrace it, right? So I want to turn this back to you, like, with your Catalyst executive hat on. How would you talk to others about what the ROI of having, hopefully, the sort of less disruptive, the positive troublemaker catalyst in your organization?
I love that phrase, positive troublemaker. I'm now going to adopt that as like a mantra. Like, maybe that'll be, maybe I should get that tattooed on my forehead or something. I don't know. But I love that. I'm a positive troublemaker. Because oftentimes we get, as when you are an innovator, you often get labeled as like a China, a bull in a China shop, or, to your point, a troublemaker. It can be difficult if you don't harness that energy and flow in the right direction. It's also hard to articulate your value if you don't stay engaged all the way. And even if you're on to the next project, you've got to have the discipline of going back and saying, this is the actual impact that what I started created. And helping organizations understand, I do think that over my career, I have seen a shift in the way organizations look at talent. And they say, we know we need people at these different levels, and there's all these assessments that you can do, and people are looking at their executive teams and they're looking at their leadership teams that aren't yet executives, but they're looking at them and saying, we know that we need people in these four types of people. Do we have the right skill sets? And so in a lot of cases, organizations are looking for people that can see around corners, that can put the dots together. And they're saying, we know that we need somebody like that to bring in that perspective. But I still have to be able to articulate if I started a project and then moved on to the next one, I need to know how that project ended. And did the vision get implemented? And what were those KPIs and the change metrics? And I need to be able to articulate that and say, this is where my value is. This is where I step out because I'm going to go start the next thing. But we're going to make sure that it gets across the finish line. And here's the person in the organization that takes that on. And this is a shared responsibility. You can't you can't be a positive influencer if you never get anything across the finish line. If you're always on to the next thing, you really haven't added value. You've created more confusion than anything else.
Spot on. And it's a place where I think a lot of catalysts can do some pretty basic skill building to level up here, and also just be thinking about, is the impact I'm talking the 0 to 1, or is it the 1 to 10, or is it the 10 to 100, right? And because all of those are valid. And so just, it doesn't mean that the smaller number is bad. It just means that that was the stage that you're at, but you still need to be able to talk to that impact. When we don't talk about, even when we're really sitting in our power, we have a tendency to overcommit. So this was the share on social that I loved of yours about the accountability. You're like, accountability to myself, to say no to the things with discipline that aren't going to serve the different things that you're looking at in your life. So like, even when we're really sitting in our power, we can tend to burn out. But earlier in career, and if we're not articulating our value and all of that stuff, it can be even harder because you're just causing friction all over, making it worse, literally. So I'm wondering, you have your yoga practice. I'm wondering if you have, as a Catalyst executive who's wearing so many hats and has a family, like what's your advice for Catalyst about maintaining your energy?
I think understanding where you draw your energy from is important, and how you in particular rejuvenate. Because I have friends who rejuvenate by being around others. Like they need that social energy. And I love being around people, but I renew my energy when I'm sitting on a beach reading a book and growing. I love to meditate. I love to be on my yoga mat. The consistency and all those things is a little bit of solitary, right? I need that peace where there aren't people around me. One of the other things that I've been working on for the last couple of years, because I think this is an ever evolving area of improvement for me, is how do I focus? I think a lot of catalysts are the people who are able to, I don't want to use the word multitask, but the people who are able to get things quickly. They move from step 1 to step 10 really quickly, and everybody else is still on step 2 or 3. And they're not good at bringing folks along, or while folks are moving through those phases, they're on to something different, maybe not a new project. Maybe this is where they're multitasking. I'll tell them myself. Sometimes I will see that everybody else is still playing catch up, and I'm like, okay, now I need to go do something else, even in the same meeting. So now I'm checking my email or doing something else, but that's disrespectful. And I recognize that and say, okay, how do I be more present and create the space and psychological safety if that's my role in the room? How do I do that? Because some people may not understand that, yeah, I'm at step 10. So now I'm taking a break and doing something else while you guys catch up. I need to be engaged with them while they're continuing to do that. And other times, then it becomes a trap, right? Other times, you may not be on step 10. You may be at step 3 with them, but your brain is used to multitasking or doing something else. And so you just start doing it. Like, this is a failure to me. Like, and I'm like I said, I'm telling on myself, this is my own failure that I am working on, and I continue to try to be better at doing that. So I do ask for some grace when I screw it up.
So, okay, if you can't see, I think I'm blushing because it's like landing so powerfully with me, and it's such an Achilles heel. And we have to, when we do our class, which has some of this foundational skill building things, it's not necessarily like learning how to build a prototype. It's like active listening as a catalyst.
Yeah.
And it can be so hard. And it's just like, it's a great reminder. Thank you. Thank you so much. And the grace.
And the grace, all the grace given, Christy. And would love to build on that. Obviously, that's a key challenge that you're sharing. Are there other challenges that you personally have experienced as a Catalyst executive that you think would be helpful for our audience to name, and advice you have in helping overcome it? Just like with this one, like do the work to find your presence and grounding, right? Are there other things that you've learned that have been personal challenges that you've overcome?
I, you know, I think about a conversation I had with someone that was helping mentor me earlier in my career. And one of the things he said was, when I first started working with you, I was really worried about your work-life balance because I compared yours to mine, and I could never work at the pace that you work. And he goes, and what I've realized over the number of years that we've been working together is your pace is different than mine. He goes, if you tried to have as much downtime as I need, you would be, to use an official technical term, batshit crazy. And so helping to figure out for you, what is that right balance? And then how do you give grace to others whose work-life balance is different, where they need more time to rejuvenate or they need less time to rejuvenate? And I've worked I can remember the first time I worked with somebody who needed less time to regenerate than I did. And I was freaked out because this human, who is an amazing lady, was sending me emails at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, oh my god, 4 o'clock in the morning is my quiet time, is my this, and I'm not responding. Are they going to think I'm not working? And what it hit me was, I wonder if that's how other people feel about me, because this is how I show up in the world. And I had never been in a situation where somebody needed less downtime and less sleep than I did, but I've certainly been in a situation where people needed more. And I always, like, from my own personal standpoint, I'm like, I'm giving them grace, and I understand this. And my expectation is not that they're on when I'm on, but is that how they are? Is that how they're experiencing me? And how do I better communicate that? And so I think that's something that, if you're a catalyst leader, you've really got to think about how you show up in the world and how you communicate that back to others, that, hey, I'm sending this to you when it's convenient for me. And so I don't forget about it because I do move on to the next thing. You can respond when it's good for you. And here's what the expectations are. But you've got to have really clear conversations. And I don't know that as a society that we're great at having those super clear conversations where people really feel that that you're being authentic and you're telling them the truth. That they may say, oh, well, those are just words. You don't really mean that. Your expectation is. And so how do you navigate that when you're trying to create change? And that, you know, I don't want to go back to saying that fires, like, when you start a fire in your organization, people are going to feel like they have to move faster. And in some cases, that's good. And in other cases, you've got to really level set what the pace and the expectations are. And I think that can be a really difficult thing for leaders to navigate. A little bit of a tightrope, or dancing backwards in high heels.
It really is. And, the more senior I got in organizations, the more I really struggled with that tension, because I'm going to be honest, from my perspective, I don't think we expect early stage, first level, individual contributor to have the same work profile, hours, output as a C-suite exec. Like, that's not a reasonable expectation. And so when you get to that level, though, where it's like the demands, you have to do the board and your thing, your first team first, and run the organization. Like, there's a lot. And you want to set the expectation for the people below you that different paces are okay. What we know statistically from the research is, by the time that people get to a certain level as a catalyst executive, they're more likely to have had some rejuvenation practices, because otherwise you've burnt out and you didn't get that far. But I'm wondering if you just have, because we have a lot of executive listeners, like, how do you navigate? And it's just a specific double click on what you just said, like the realities of the demands of your job, plus your catalytic nature, and setting that pacing for the organization.
So like, from a day-to-day standpoint, I think some of the small practices make the biggest difference. Like, every morning I get up and the first thing that I do is my devotion and my quiet time. And then I get into, like, and by the way, during part of that period, I'm trying to convince myself I should go to the gym because I know it's the right thing to do. So I can't, I'm not one of those folks that can just roll out of the bed onto the floor and do 50 push-ups. It's like, okay, let me do my quiet time. Let me have a nice big glass of water or tea, get to the gym, do some reading. I like to do my reading then before the day starts. It also keeps me from sending emails to people at 4:30 in the morning. And it's because of that small practice and that commitment that it keeps me from overwhelming other people with what my schedule looks like. And Also, I have learned to use the set, send later.
I was thinking that as you were saying that, totally.
I wish I could do that for text messages, but so if somebody from Apple is on here listening, like, please put that into your development roadmap. I need the scheduled send for my text messages as well as from my email box. And so doing things, it also, when I think about when I ask my assistant to schedule meetings, I have hours that are blocked so that it's like, hey, don't please don't schedule meetings at lunch unless somebody specifically says they want to do it over lunch, or don't schedule them before, even though I'm going to be in the office at 7 a.m. Don't schedule my first meeting until 9 unless there's somebody who specifically says, hey, I know you're in the office. Can we meet at this particular time? Same thing for later in the day. Hey, I may not leave the office until 7 or 8, but and that's not every day. I don't want people to think that I'm in the office all that time, but for days that I am, it's like only if people ask. Don't have the expectation that just because I'm here, somebody else is going to be here.
A few small hacks is what I take away from this with intentionality and commitment can make such a difference. So thank you for sharing that because it can feel really, for me, it can feel really overwhelming. Like, oh, I have to do that perfectly, or I need to like this wholesale change in my life. And that's not reasonable. So I love the intentionality. As we wrap up, this has been an amazing conversation and I want to keep picking your brain, but as we wrap up, I'd love to hear from you. Who is your favorite inspirational catalyst and why?
Okay. You know, I live in a world of, I like to have catalysts and people that are real. And I know that there are some folks who can look on the internet and they can see somebody that they don't know and they can be energized by that person. That's not me. I like the real life folks. So I'm going to pick our friend Amy Radon. And the reason that I pick Amy, if you guys don't know and follow Amy and you're watching this, you should go and connect with her immediately. Read her book, do the things. But she's so down to earth and practical. And she lives what she talks about every day. This is not just what she says because she thinks that somebody else should do it. This is what she has lived. These are her lived experiences. She has seen the value that it creates. And she's kind of a quiet person, yet she creates this outsized impact because she's so persistent and so knowledgeable that it's the quiet person in the corner that you just want to pay attention to because you know that there's going to be something good as soon as they say it.
We're so grateful to her, Amy, for connecting us. And also, I just have to plus one what you said, because she's also just so committed to helping bring the change makers and catalysts along behind her and sharing her experience from this really humble and deeply authentic place. So I was kind of hoping you might say her actually, but I'm glad that you did. I didn't want to force it. Christy, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I know there's so much going on in your world, so thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom with our audience.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure today.
To our listening audience, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world or find your catalysts in your organization, go ahead and reach out to us. You can check out our website at catalystconstellations.com.
If you enjoyed this episode as much as Shannon and I have getting to talk to Christy, please take a few seconds to rate it wherever you listen to your podcast, and definitely hit a share link so that you can share with all the catalysts in your life. Thanks again.